Firstly, check that the waistbands are the correct length. I measure from the 7mm mark we made by the bearer, half the waist towards the centre back. I'm doing the same from the centre front on the fly side to the centre back again. If these measurements are a little off from the centre back, we can just move where that is. Mine is a little off, possibly because I'm measuring over the side tabs. On the fly side, the right trouser, on the inside, chalk on the line that we'll machine so that it's clear. 1 cm from the mark stitches and then 1 cm from the fabric. Follow the seam up into the waistband. Again, I had to move my centre back so it's not perfectly following the mark stitches, so I just rejoined them in a natural straight line. Push down the inlay on the inseam such that its top edge follows the rest of the trouser. That way it has ease and won't become tight. Flip the fly side inside out. It's easiest to do it this specific way round, and place the guard side inside of it. Line up the centre back, the notch at the bottom of the zip, and everything else in between. Be sure the mark stitched lines are lined up, not just the raw edges of the inlay, the inside leg seam and any other balance points. The inside leg seams don't necessarily need to line up because some trousers have duress. This is for guys and their little guys. One trouser leg is slightly bigger so that the cock and balls can hang or sit more comfortably. On the outside, we want the fly side to slightly overlap the guard side. That should happen by default if we line up the fabric at the notch exactly and sew it with a 1 cm seam allowance. However, with the fly side on top as we sew it, we can confirm that the notch we cut into the guard is slightly inside of the cut in the fly. Securely baste the two in place. When you get to the inside trouser leg inlay, again, be sure that they won't pull, so push them down a little bit. Be sure as well that the waistband seams and stuff are open. Also through the waistband. I would venture that the waistband is the most important part to get even and lined up properly, or second most important part to get right after the notch. To machine, start at the notch. We are only sewing through the trouser fabric, not the zip tape or the guard or the fly. You may favour to use the wheel to stick the needle into the notch with the 1 cm-ish seam allowance. Start at the notch where it is cut to at the seam holding the fly. Back tack onto it securely. As you get to the back trouser, you are following the 1 cm from the mark stitch, not the inlay. This is made easy considering we chalked the line to follow. Get all the way up to the top of the waistband, though there are half-back trousers where it's only a few stitches into the waistband for greater comfort. When you've gotten around where you want to be, keep the needle in there and turn the entire trouser around. Sew the entire length that you had just sewn. That way, the most vulnerable part of the trouser is less likely to split. Look at what you've done, make sure it's okay and good. The stitch line is smooth and follows the lines that we want. Take the basting out. Iron the seam flat and stretch the inlay a bit. Wet and pull. Don't stretch the stitching though. Do the same at the fork, but you can stretch the stitching a bit. Iron the seam open, which again is easiest on a sleeve board or a ham. If it's difficult to press open, then it might be because the inlay wasn't stretched sufficiently. It might be too tight and might be trying to pull itself back together. With the inside of the fly facing upwards, we can position the fly so that the front trouser is bleeding onto the inside of the cloth so that it can't be seen from the outside. We can baste it in place between the notch and the waistband. Do the zip up and proceed to position the right trouser in place. It should be overlapping by a few millimeters at the bottom, and then it's overlapping by the 7 millimeters we decided earlier when attaching the waistband. Make sure as well that the waistbands line up. Baste it up so that the whole trouser is closed up there. Baste through as much as you need to. Basting up into the waistband should hold it together more securely for positioning the zip. Then baste the zip tape to the fly piece. Make sure you're only basting the two together because there's more sewing that needs to be done between them. And make sure that you don't push or pull the zip. Let the zip sit exactly where it wants to on the fly. Something else we could do is to let the front sit flat and gently move the bearer out of the way. We can then chalk onto the fly where the zip tape is. We can then make sure the tape is lined up to that as we fasten it. Fell and prick stitch them. Fell from the bottom all the way up the edge of the zip tape, then prick stitch about halfway through the tape. Both of these only to the fly. It is possible to machine it though, 2 stitches in the same places as the hand stitches. Take the basting out. To prepare the J-stitch, we need to baste the fly to the trouser. Easiest over a ham or sleeve board, since the back of the trouser wants to be in the way behind it. Make sure the fly and trouser are flat together. We don't want either to be pulling or rumpling the other. And we don't want the trouser to be eased almost at all between the stitch and the center front. I'm not pulling the trouser fabric over the fly, I'm just making sure there is little to no excess cloth, smoothing the cloth over the fly. I'm tapering towards the seam as I get towards the notch. To baste the fly down, I'm using a half running half prick stitch with basting thread. Once I fasten the thread at the top, I first make a normal basting stitch. Where I come out of the cloth, I move a few millimeters towards my start point and do a stitch in the direction of stitching. Then I do another running stitch, then another prick stitch, and so on. It looks like a sequence of dots and dashes. The prick of the stitch keeps the basting more secure than it would be if it were just a running stitch. It's difficult to see the dots and dashes from this distance, but take a closer look later. I fasten the baste between the seam, making sure I don't sew through the bearer too much, and especially not its cilicia. We chalk on the J-stitch to follow a line. The generic measurement is 3.5 centimeters at the top and the same all the way down until it curves into the bottom of the seam where the notch is. Interestingly, the math says that our prick stitch should be just hidden the same way as the sink stitch between the cilicia on the fly. It doesn't seem to work out that way most of the time though. I'm measuring how far the cilicia on the fly is from the edge and measuring the same amount onto the front of the trouser. Try to make it as fine a line as possible so that you can follow it with pricks most easily, curving in, finishing on the notch where the seat seam starts. Close the zip and lay the bearer and its cilicia flat inside of the trouser. Chalk the edge of the seam allowance onto the cilicia, just feeling through all the way down to the bottom of the bearer and fly. Flare it out a little at the bottom, we might want some excess later. On the centre back, force the waistband inlay down a very small amount and sew it in place, baste in place. Not much more than 5mm down, I'd say though, but enough to be hidden by the waistband lining later. Tack it to the seam allowance at the bottom, then the top, and fell along the top. Tack it to the seam allowance at the bottom, and then the top, and then fell across the top, being sure that the stitches don't show on the outside of the trouser. We don't want any of these stitches to show on the outside of the trouser. Fell across to the top of the other waistband edge and tack that as well at the top and the bottom. Fell across the top simply to hold and stop it from being able to open up. It's already secure, we just don't want there to be a hole that can be fingered. As you get to the center back, you can just skip across through the middle, not exposing the thread to fell down the other side, to tack the top and skip straight down to the bottom. I'm using my finishing silk for this. If you wanted to baste the waistband inlay first, we could remove the basting when we're done. We don't need it anymore. Now we'll secure the back pocket or pockets to the waistband. Be sure they are laying flat against each other, and you could iron them as well. Trim away the top little bits, make sure it resides below the top of the waistband, easiest over a tailor's ham. Cross stitch the tops of the pockets to the waistband, being sure that you're attaching it to the canvas, not going through to the outside. Before you sew, make sure they aren't tight together and that they won't pull or anything. And that there's barely a tiny amount of slack. We don't want to go to the other way where the silicea bunches up. At this point, because I didn't do it in the waistband video, I'll attach a belt loop to the center back of my trouser. If we wanted belt loops, we'd have already attached the rest of them when we put on the waistband, though we couldn't put one on the center back until after we got the two legs together. With our last belt loop then, begin lining it up to the center back with one raw side about 1/2 centimeter below the waistband, lined up to the waistband, and with the seam facing the waistband, so we see the clean side. Start with tacking it there either side. I'm moving the belt loop out of the way first to moor the thread on the center back, and you may like to cut the corners of the currently exposed edge. When it's secure on both sides, start with one side, fold the loop down and fell stitch 1 centimeter straight down. Again, tack it like we do the belt loops, prick stitch to the other side and tack that one as well. Fell back up to where we started, making sure the exposed seam is hidden under the loop and between our stitching, which is made easier when we cut the little bit away. Secure the thread out of the way inside of the trouser. We'd secure the top of the loop in the same way as we did the rest. We'll finish the center fronts. I'll start with the bearer. Trim away some of the excess cloth above the waistband seam from the front trouser and the bearer, leaving all of the silicea. We'll need the silicea to cover it, but we want to layer the cloth behind it so that it sits more flat. Fold back the waistband such that it is flush with the bearer below it. Iron a crease there so that you know where that is. We need to trim away the canvas. You'll need to unpick a bit of the top and possibly the bottom depending on your exact method. We only need about 1 centimeter of cloth beyond the bearer to fold back, so you could trim it down if you have much more than 2 or 3 centimeters. We barely need a centimetre, but enough to comfortably fasten it down. We will fold it back so that it covers the inlays that we trimmed and layered. Secure the waistband cloth in the same way we did the centre back. Force it down from the top slightly so that we can hide the raw edges underneath the waistband lining. Tack them on the top and bottom and fill across the top edge to the waistband so that there's no gaping at all. Very similar on the fly side. Unless you want an extended waistband, then choose how much extra you want beyond the center front on the fly side, which is the norm with side adjusters, so that there's 2 hooks and bars sharing the increased strain. We need to unpick the waistband seam so that it's in line with the rest of the trouser again and cut away any loose threads. Trim the excess cloth from the fly and inlay from the trouser front, layering them both, cutting off the top of the zip so that it sits about halfway through the waistband. Again, fold and crease the waistband so that it's flush with the center front to trim off the canvas. I suggest leaving more cloth, like 3 or 4 centimeters, that we can set the hook onto. Fold the cloth over the top of the zip and the cloth that we layered. For the last time, force it down from the top slightly so that we can hide the raw edges underneath the waistband lining. Fold it up slightly on the bottom as well and get that secure. Tack them on the bottom and the top and fill across to the edge of the waistband so that there's no gaping at all. I also fell across the bottom of the folded back piece to fasten the top of the zip down underneath it as well. Depending on the exact type of hook and bar you have will dictate the exact method of attachment. But with a normal 2-piece hook and bar, you need to begin by cutting a strip from your leftover curtain to loop through the hole in the hook, which will hold the end of the waistband in a curve. When attaching it, be sure that the hook is on top of the folded back front fabric. Place it a little closer than half a centimeter from the front edge, otherwise it's too visible from the outside. Not too far either though. I'm also marking about halfway down the waistband. To secure it, you will be best using doubled up silk because it needs to be really strong. For the same reason, we need to catch the canvas. Start with one of the front holes and go through that one a few times, sewing around the entire perimeter of the hole so that it is held in place properly from all angles. Moving on to the other, going between underneath the fabric so that there isn't 2 centimeters of thread exposed. While it is important to sew through the bandroll canvas, it is equally, if not more important, that we don't have any exposed thread on the outside of the cloth. It becomes unsightly and susceptible to being damaged. Again, circling the hole, making stitches all the way around the perimeter. Then moving to the back, last one, securing it either side thoroughly. With the hook set in place, use the strip that you attached and pull on it slightly, only enough to curve the end of the band. Attach it there to the waistband canvas. We don't need to tack it too far, maybe 2 or 3 centimeters from the hook. It doesn't need to be pretty, but it does need to be secure and not visible from the outside of the waistband. We can trim off any excess silicea beyond where we tacked it. When you attach the bar, you need the exact position of where it needs to go to couple with the hook. Do up the zip, make sure the waistbands line up, chalk the vertical tip of the hook and both sides of it as well. We need to make the holes on our vertical chalk marks. Now we'd best use an awl. It's used for making holes in cloth without cutting or breaking it, rather just moving the fibers out of the way. In lieu of said tool, we'll have to improvise, easing into it with progressively large instruments, beginning with a basting needle or the largest needle you have. Then we could use a nail. I use a spiral shank nail. In spite of what I'm clearly doing, I think it's best to make the holes where we drew the intersecting chalk marks, not just inside of them. Make the first hole and stick the bar through it. Not the easiest thing to do unless your hole is big enough. If we can, put the bar somewhere to hold it upright and or steady and pull the trouser hole down onto it. We might need to push the cloth or the canvas fibers a little from inside in order to get the widest point through. The second side is a bit more of a challenge and you need to do some acrobatics to get it in there. We need to make the second hole and force the bar further into the first hole before we can get it into the second. Check when you get it in place that it's in the right place on both the vertical and the horizontal. Make sure the waistbands line up properly, have a good look at it and check that the front trouser still has the 7mm overlap from the seam where the zip is. Use the same thread you used for the hook. Sew the bar through both its holes to the canvas, still importantly not catching through the outside fabric. The 3-piece catch-ons with the no-sew bars that you stab through the fabric and then bend the prongs into a secure position, those will basically go in the same way, except it's a little bit easier.